Stopping ISIS. Will Congress give the president war powers to combat the Islamic State? Catholicism and immigration. A bishop from near the border explains why the church is pushing for reform. National Marriage Week. A new online retreat helps couples pray together and stay together. And the joy of a child. Pope Francis says the choice to have children is vital for a healthy, happy society. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, February the 11th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The president today formally asks Congress to authorize military force against the Islamic State. Republicans aren't happy that he's ruling out any long-term commitment of U.S. ground forces. Democrats are voicing dismay that he's opening the door at all to a troop deployment. Chief White House correspondent Susanne LaFrankie has more tonight.
The president says the U.S.-led military coalition will succeed in destroying the Islamic State. Ground forces, he says, are not necessary, which has sparked bipartisan skepticism. But the president vows that ISIS is going to lose.
Now, make no mistake, this is a difficult mission, and it will remain difficult for some time.
In urging Congress to back military force, the president ruled out a sustained military operation. That's meant to satisfy lawmakers with widely different views on any role for U.S. ground troops. Yesterday's confirmation of the death of 26-year-old humanitarian worker Kayla Mueller added new urgency. Today, Mr. Obama called for a united front.
I believe this resolution can grow even stronger with the thoughtful and dignified debate that this moment demands. I'm optimistic that it can win strong bipartisan support and that we can show our troops and the world that Americans are united in this mission.
White House aides met with lawmakers from both parties before unveiling the plan in hopes of lining up support. Republican leaders want more firepower.
The president's point is that he wants to dismantle and destroy ISIS. I haven't seen a strategy yet that I think will accomplish it.
Some Republicans are calling for ground troops, an option the administration opposes. The president's proposal limits military authorization to 3 years with no geographic limitations. The authorization bans a long-term, large-scale ground combat operations like those deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. It also includes the flexibility to conduct rescue operations and the use of special forces. Another protracted war concerns some Democratic lawmakers, while others agree ISIS must be dealt with.
We hope to have bipartisan support for something that would limit the power of the president, but nonetheless protect the American people.
Chances are likely before the measure comes to a vote, an initial hearing in the House is set for tomorrow. Whatever the outcome, the president's request and likely congressional action could have an impact on the U.S. for years to come. From the White House, Susanne LaFrankie, EWTN News Nightly.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Congress is set to send a bill approving the Keystone XL oil pipeline to the president in spite of his vow of a veto. With Republicans now in control of the Senate and the House, they still don't have enough votes to override a veto. Backers of the bill say they're strategizing ways to get approved by other means. Supporters argue that the $8 billion project will create jobs and boost U.S. energy security. Opponents say the pipeline running from Canada through America's heartland is bad for the environment. Pope Francis again calls for solidarity with migrants. This renewed call comes after hundreds of people trying to cross the Mediterranean are reported missing.
Desidero assicurare la mia preghiera per le vittime e incoraggiare nuovamente alla solidarietà.
The Pope praying for the victims and for migrants to get the help they need. The suspected deaths add to the 29 reported earlier in the week by the Italian Coast Guard. Those victims died of hypothermia during the voyage that began over the weekend in Libya. That's where most smuggling operations originate. Some of the victims died during the long journey. Others, in very poor physical condition, died during the rescue attempt. The UN blasted the new EU-backed rescue patrol as ineffective in saving lives.
It's not a rescue operation. It's not an operation that was conceived as a rescue operation. It's mainly looking at border control. Nothing has taken its place that can indeed enhance the capacity to provide rescue of human lives in the Mediterranean.
The EU took over the Mediterranean patrols after Italy phased out its operation, which was launched after 360 migrants died in 2013. Russia's President Vladimir Putin flies to the capital of Belarus for crucial talks to end violence in eastern Ukraine. Leaders of France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine gathered in Minsk to discuss a possible deal. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande brokered these talks. They're hoping to end hostilities between Ukrainian troops and Russian-backed separatists. More than 5,300 people have died in fighting since April. By phone yesterday, President Obama urged Putin to find a peaceful solution to the conflict. The U.S. is considering arming Ukraine with lethal weapons. America's most-watched anchorman is suspended for 6 months without pay. NBC's investigation is not over, and CEO Steve Burke calls Brian Williams' actions inexcusable. NBC News president says Williams clearly misrepresented his experience in Iraq in 2003. Deborah Turner says it was clear that on other occasions he had done the same thing while telling the story in other venues. The absence of Williams is a major blow to NBC News, which averages around 10 million viewers a night. Weekend anchor and Dateline host Lester Holt will anchor News Nightly during Williams' suspension. Peggy Stanton joining us by phone from Grosse Pointe, Michigan, the host of Ave Maria's Power from the Pews. Peggy worked in Washington for 30 years, covering Washington as the first female correspondent in ABC News' Washington Bureau. Peggy, this is a guy that has done everything right, obviously, to get to the place that he is, but he's made mistakes like the rest of us as veteran journalists. What was the mistake, and why do we need to be very careful about credibility and truth?
Well, I think particularly maybe in the world of celebrity, the tendency to inflate our importance is not only Brian Williams' failure. I think we've all been guilty. But this doesn't excuse it, in him or any of us. And this episode, I think, showcases it. I think NBC strategically did exactly what they had to do. They had to get him out of the news spotlight because he was becoming the subject rather than the purveyor. And I think they're hoping that in 6 months this attention deficit nation will have forgotten and forgiven, and that maybe he can, it doesn't seem possible that he can quietly move back into the chair.
But certainly this can affect the rest of journalism, the way people see us, our credibility. Can we recover from that?
Well, I think the journal integrity is supposed to be the hallmark of journalism, and Brian, I'm frankly deeply troubled by news coverage today, as are so many Americans who talk to me about it. And I think there's just as big a gap in the journalistic integrity of omission as well as commission. For instance, I recently covered, the March for Life in Washington, D.C. for my radio show. And it was estimated, I think you agree, the crowd was about 500,000 strong. That's huge. But the Washington Post, which, being the city that it was in, it should have been on the front page. I went through that front section 3 times before I found it.
Peggy, that's all the time we have, but we really appreciate your insight on this story. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Pope Francis focused on children as a gift at today's general audience. The Holy Father says the choice to have children is not irresponsible, but vital for a healthy, happy society. He says children are the joy of family and society. They're not a problem or a parent's possession. Children are a gift. The Pope asked parents in the crowd in St. Peter's Square to take a moment and thank God for their children. He also says he loves seeing parents lifting their kids up for a blessing. Coming up, a bishop from America's Southwest visits Washington advocating for immigrants. And some of America's courageous first responders are awarded the Medal of Valor. Today, February 11th, is the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. On this date, in 1858, Mary appeared to 14-year-old French peasant Bernadette Soubirous, the first of 18 apparitions at Lourdes. More on Our Lady of Lourdes a little bit later on tonight. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick with the EWTN News Nightly team. The captain of a shipwrecked Italian cruise ship is sentenced to 16 years in prison today. 32 lives were lost in the Costa Concordia disaster 3 years ago. Francesco Scatino was convicted of causing a shipwreck and abandoning ship with many of the 4,200 passengers and crew still on board. Today's verdict ends a trial that lasted more than a year and a half, and it's been an exhausting run. The defense lawyer for the Costa Concordia cruise ship almost fainted during closing arguments yesterday. Scatino broke down today, sobbing before the jury decided his fate. He maintains he's a scapegoat. Lawyers representing survivors and the families of victims are pressing for hefty damages from that cruise line. House Speaker John Boehner is pressuring Senate Democrats to pass a controversial bill. It would fund Homeland Security while restricting President Obama's executive order on immigration.
In a gift shop out here, they've got these little booklets on how a bill becomes a law, right? The House has done its job. Why don't you go ask the Senate Democrats when they're going to get off their and do something other than to vote no?
Boehner's comments underscore a stalemate on Capitol Hill. Funding for the Homeland Security Department is set to expire at the end of this month. Boehner says Senate Democrats are at fault for blocking the House-passed bill that funds the department but not the implementation of the administration's immigration policies. The funding stalemate comes as a House subcommittee looks at several bills to toughen immigration laws. The subcommittee hears from a Catholic bishop who is close to that issue. Jason Calvi reports tonight from Capitol Hill.
Bishop Gerald Kakanis serves the border diocese of Tucson, Arizona. He himself is the son of Lebanese immigrants. He says it's time for immigration reform.
To find a way for the 11 million people here to have a pathway to citizenship, to have legal ways for people to come and help us with the work that needs to be done here in the United States, and the importance of family unification.
A House Judiciary Subcommittee is looking at 3 bills leaders say would discourage illegal immigration and reform asylum laws. One of the bills up for discussion today is the so-called SAFE Act. It would give cities and states the power to enforce immigration laws. Back in 2013, faith leaders, including the U.S. bishops and the American Jewish Committee, wrote a letter to Speaker Boehner criticizing this proposal.
We're very concerned about the criminalization that this bill for those who are here in an undocumented status, and especially for the assistance that pastoral ministers or others would provide for people who are here without documentation, that they themselves could be criminalized.
On the other side, supporting the proposals, is the Center for Immigration Studies' Dan Cadman.
Treating someone with dignity doesn't necessarily mean that you always agree with them violating the provisions of law that apply.
Illinois Democrat Luis Gutierrez, a supporter of abortion and gay marriage, wants Republicans to listen to the church, at least on immigration.
Because I would like to juxtapose what they say today with the position of my church, your church, the Catholic Church, here in the United States of America.
But Bishop Kakanis says he's speaking not from a Republican or Democratic perspective, but from his faith.
Our faith is what brings us to address the issue of life from conception until natural death, the importance of the dignity of all human life, the need to respect human life.
At the Capitol, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. Did an argument over a parking space lead to the shooting deaths of 3 Muslim North Carolina students? The students were shot to death in an apartment complex near the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill on Tuesday. Police say a 46-year-old man turned himself in and has been charged with murder. They say the suspect is cooperating and said it started with a dispute over parking spaces. Chapel Hill's police chief says his department will exhaust every lead to determine if this was a hate crime based on the faith of the shooting victims. A former Marine is on trial for the murder of Chris Kyle, depicted in the blockbuster movie American Sniper. Eddie Ray Routh is accused of killing the former Navy SEAL and his friend, Chad Littlefield, at a Texas shooting range 2 years ago. The defense attorney says Routh has a history of mental illness. The lawyer admits he was at the shooting range, spiraling out of control, thinking his own life was in danger. This case has drawn intense interest because of Kyle's memoir about being a sniper who served 4 tours in Iraq. The Oscar-nominated film based on the book has already grossed nearly $300 million. Heroes who helped save lives in New England and Wisconsin are honored at the White House with the Medal of Valor today. The White House ceremony recognizes first responders to the Boston Marathon bombing and a shooting at a Sikh temple near Milwaukee. Vice President Joe Biden presented the purple and yellow ribbons to police officers, firefighters, and security personnel. The medal is awarded to those who exhibit exceptional courage trying to save or protect the lives of others. Up next, during National Marriage Week, a Virginia couple finds support and strength through an online retreat. And celebrating Our Lady of Lourdes and the many miraculous healings attributed to her intercession. It's normal that there be a quarrel between husband and wife. Maybe you're angry, maybe a plate flew. But please remember this: never finish the day without making peace. Advice Pope Francis gave to couples preparing for marriage last year on Valentine's Day. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. This is National Marriage Week. Marriage today faces serious challenges, including efforts to redefine it and a soaring divorce rate. Tonight, Catherine Szeltner shows us a virtual initiative helping married couples strengthen their bond.
Kids, work, chores. In today's world, spouses don't have time to be a couple. Renee and Michelle Islas have been married for 12 years. With 4 children, the idea of a weekend getaway is laughable.
We wouldn't offload 4 children for a weekend.
We have close friends, but that's not something we feel like we can ask them to do.
That's why the Diocese of Arlington is offering an online retreat for busy couples for the first time during National Marriage Week. A new video is posted each morning, and it's only about 15 minutes long. Bishop Paula Verde shares a reflection and suggests questions husband and wife can ask each other, bringing couples closer with just a click. Renee and Michelle say the videos are a realistic option to strengthen their marriage in the hustle and bustle of everyday life.
We thought it was a good idea, a nice way to sneak away after work, after the kids are in bed, to really focus on each other and our relationship to God.
The Islas believe married life mirrors their relationship with God, so setting aside time to be with each other is a priority.
As women, we get caught up in that. We want to be a good mom, we want to be good role models, but we forget that we also need to, our vocation is to be wife as well.
The online retreat ends on Saturday, Valentine's Day. But this couple hopes to keep praying together, in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, all the days of their life. Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Sheila Weber is the Executive Director of National Marriage Week. This initiative started in the UK 5 years ago. It happens annually now in 20 countries leading up to Valentine's Day. And Sheila, you work on the premise that marriage makes sense based on social science. What is the case for that?
Yes, social science is very clear that marriage is good for you. And in fact, this month, the Federal Bureau of Economic Research said that marriage, in fact, makes people happier. They have greater satisfaction in life. But unfortunately, fewer people are choosing to be married. In fact, in 1970, 79% of all the adults in the U.S. were married. Today, only 52% of the adults in the U.S. are married. So that's a huge drop-off. And that really is not good news for children, because it means that more children are not being raised by their mother and father.
Lower income groups seem to have lower marriage rates. Are you able to reach people in that group with your message?
Well, we hope so, because we know that we'd have 25% less poverty in our country today if we had the marriage rates in 1970. And we have 41% of all U.S. babies being born outside of marriage, which again disadvantages them. Children have less, they have more teen pregnancy, more trouble with the law, and more difficulty in school, more addiction issues if they're raised without their mother and father. So we want to have people find more success in staying together in order to parent their children. There's a really interesting statistic that if you graduate from high school and work full-time and postpone marriage and childbearing until you're 21, there's only a 2% chance that you'll be in poverty. If you don't do those things, there's a 77% chance of poverty.
Sheila, your website tackles this in a creative way. Tell us about the National Marriage Calendar.
Well, at nationalmarriageweekusa.org, we have the only online national marriage calendar. So we're trying to encourage people in every town in America to start a marriage class or workshop, and you can post it for free on that calendar. You also can go and find a class that's near you right now. Last year we had 1,000 events across the country. We want to increase that number and have marriage education in every town in America because it's beneficial for children and it reduces poverty.
So marriage is a challenge, but it's certainly worth it, isn't it?
It is worth it. Marriage makes people happier, have greater financial resources, live longer lives. In fact, single men live 10 years less than married men, and it's the best environment for raising the next generation of citizens in this country.
Sheila Weber, the executive director of the National Marriage Week, during this Marriage Week 2015. Thank you for joining us by satellite from New York City tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And Pope Francis asks all of us to take the time to visit the sick and pray for those who are suffering. The Holy Father is marking World Day of the Sick. It coincides with today's feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. Wyatt Goolsby has that story.
During his regular audience Wednesday, after greeting the crowds, the Holy Father did something a little out of the ordinary. He stopped and offered a prayer in front of a statue of Mary on this, the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. It's no coincidence it falls on the World Day of the Sick. Every year, millions visit the Lourdes shrine in southern France, many disabled or desperately sick, in hopes of a miracle. The grotto was where 14-year-old Saint Bernadette had multiple visions of the Virgin Mary in 1858 and bathed in its spring. Even past popes have visited the shrine, offering prayers for the faithful in need of healing. While thousands have claimed to be healed, less than 70 cases have ever qualified as miracles. The Church even consults with a French medical doctor who investigates claims of miraculous healings.
As a scientist with faith, I hold in my two hands, on the one side, reason and science, and on the other, faith and belief. And the two work together. For me, it's not a question of separating them, but a question of distinguishing between those two approaches that are necessary to establish the truth. But they need to be kept together, not separated.
It was one of the most moving experiences for me.
Father James Gardner, a priest at the Franciscan monastery, has visited the shrine in France and celebrated Mass at a replica in Washington.
Any kind of a shrine that promotes devotion to Mary, Mother of God, Mother of Jesus, Mother of the Church, I mean, it is an important shrine, and that's where we make this available to people.
Franciscans here in Washington say St. Bernadette serves as a good example of someone devoted to Mary, and that idea of devotion remains a central focus to many of the activities here at the monastery. Father Jim says whether it's celebrating a Mass here on Marian feast days or just individuals stopping by to pray the Rosary, the image of Our Lady of Lourdes serves as a source of strength for all, not just those with physical ailments.
As you're waiting to go in, you're given a little piece of paper to read where it talks about, these waters are not miraculous. The closest thing to miraculous waters are the waters of baptism, by which you're incorporated into the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
And it's the daily miracles of everyday life, Father Jim says, that's just as profound as the, quote, official ones. In Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Wyatt. Well, it was 2 years ago today. I'll never forget this. Pope Benedict XVI stunned the world, announcing his resignation. The 85-year-old pontiff announced the news in Latin during a routine morning meeting of Vatican cardinals. It quickly made headlines around the world. Benedict was the first pope to resign in nearly 600 years. He, of course, has been succeeded by Pope Francis. That happened the following month. The Pope Emeritus lives a life of prayer and study in a monastery inside the Vatican. He occasionally meets with Pope Francis and sometimes attends Vatican events. It was a blessing to be there in Rome for the canonization of John Paul II and John the 23rd that Pope Benedict XVI Emeritus attended. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. You can watch anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We'll finish tonight with these moments from today's general audience with Pope Francis. Good night, and may God bless you.